Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's now my privilege to introduce our next speaker, who is joining us from Sydney in Australia. So it's midnight. we will all stay awake, but I'm welcoming Anand Tamboli, the CEO of KNEWRON Technologies, and Anand Tamboli and Co. The topic is solving the maze of technology ethics, which is a fascinating topic. Anand, thank you for joining us, even though it's so late, and we are really looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me here. And you might have realized the topic is so mouthful, so big, but allow me to put my point across as I tell you about why is it so. So technology is like an amplifier, and it mirrors our ethical stance. So the only difference is it's highly scalable. It is fast, and it makes it more powerful as well as dangerous. Now, many organizations now understand that you can have a competitive advantage in AI economy if you have high ethical capacity. But the point is, mere existence of ethical guidelines cannot guarantee that it can steer through ethical dilemmas and ethical questions. You need practical frameworks that are necessary, that are realistic. But then there is a difference between having a quality management policy and having a quality management framework that people can use. And the same applies to technology ethics. Understanding the AI ecosystem from a system perspective, which is what I like to call it, can become a significant advantage for you as a contributor, as a developer. You may be developer, you may be project manager, you may be a CEO, a leader, anyone. If you're connected to AI and AI economy, this is where it comes to an important step. So when it comes to technology ethics, people often have different connotations. So some people think it is about technology ethics, right? AI ethics is what some people would think about. Some people would call it as ethical AI, and some think it is all about responsible AI. Some also think it is about just the tech ethics, like they don't want to get into too many nomenclature wars here. But I think if it's about all of this, it's a mix of all of that. But more importantly, it is about, to be very simplistic, it is about being considerate. And I say that because as a technology contributor, and that means pretty much everybody who is working in a tech domain, as a developer, as an architect, as a project manager, you could be CTO, anyone playing an important role in this ecosystem, you have to be considerate. And the only reason why you have to be considerate is because you have the ultimate power. Technology is like an amplifier, it's a powerful, and you have got that power in your hands. So whatever you do can make or break things at a very large scale. I remember when I was a kid and we moved from a small village. I used to live in a small village, and we moved to a big city, and it was my first time I got to see cars, big vehicles, and I always marvel like how these cars work, because all I used to see is the steering wheel. I didn't know there was something underneath. So I asked my father that how do these things work? How people drive cars with just the steering wheel. He said, no, it's not just the steering wheel. There are several other parts that help in driving the car. And then he went on explaining me how the accelerator, brake, and clutch work together. But then I had this pesky little question, and I said, well, accelerator, I can understand. Why do we need brakes? Wouldn't they stop the car? And he answered it differently. He said the function of the brake is to slow down the car, but the purpose is to enable the car go faster. Brakes in the car do not slow it down, they allow it to go faster. Try imagining driving a car that doesn't have brakes, and I'm sure you won't be able to drive it as fast as you want to. And that is what is happening with technology for past several years. There have been far too many companies that have applied the motto or the idea of moving fast and breaking things. And unfortunately, we have broken so many things in on social terms, on political terms, democratic terms, environmental terms. And I think only having a quality policy or corporate governance policy is not going to cut it. It's not going to be helpful. We need more than that. And even more when it comes to the AI ecosystem, because, like I said, it's an amplifier. So every day you see new AI solutions that keep coming up. We solve some problems and then we create new ones, right? Think about it. If a salesperson sells you something by overpromising, you could sue them for mis-selling, and there are laws that prevent mis-selling, and they vary differently country to country. But if a chatbot or if an AI system, online service system does that to you, who would you sue? And therefore, the key question here is, what does it take to develop a great product, a great AI product, or great AI system as such? How do you develop a great solution that is sustainable, technologically more responsible, or should I say ethical? And in my view, there are three aspects that any solution must cover to tick those boxes of being responsible, being uh, ethical, and being considerate. So, what are those three things? So, the first aspect here is quite fundamental. Every solution, no matter which it is, it must be designed to do the right thing in mind, right? And I think because most technologies do want to do the right thing, that's not a problem, that's not an issue. The second key aspect, though, here is doing it right. But again, we are fortunate. There is enough information available on internet across the globe at different conferences like this one and many other channels where you will get to learn how to do things right. What are the best practices? What are the best case studies and other things, right? So this is also a point that is covered. Now, the third factor that is most of us and most of the businesses miss is covering all the risks. Now, we are not talking about risk from project perspective, like a project risk or a financial risk. We're talking about overall solution risk. Many people who try to do it always conflate it with business risk, financial risk, and all that. But actually, we also need to cover unintended consequences. And when you cover all these three aspects of a good solution design, you will actually have a good five-star product in your hand. But now the question is, when it comes to implementing these aspects, I've seen people giving a lot of attention to having a policy. They will talk about risk management policy, governance policy, etc. And I think it's having any policy is not going to cut it. It's not going to help you do anything better. We also need something that is actionable in nature. That's something you can read, but also follow, that also you can apply. And not just you at a leadership position, but also everyone down the line. Right? A framework that every single individual in your technical team can use. So when I used to work with banks, and I did work with quite a few banks. Every time there was a money laundering case, people held banks responsible. Not that bank was complicit. In most cases, in almost all the cases, they were never complicit. They were never been the part of that money laundering by intention. But the machinery they built, the infrastructure they built, did contribute to those lapses. It did enable money laundering in the first instance. And that is why people blame banks for not having the framework, that not having those controls in place. And I think now with this AI ecosystem, we have you have this responsibility to establish actionable measures, to enable all the technologies to deploy and measure these in their day-to-day work. And that is where I think implementing these ethical measures and considerations into product design is becoming more important, not just at a policy level, but at a product level. Because it makes little to no sense to improve a product after it has gone out and has caused certain damage. I mean, why would you want to wait for something to cause a problem and then fix something if you can anticipate it, right? If you can anticipate something and fix it beforehand, it will enable you to do that effectively. Then why don't you do it, right? And in order to do that, I highly recommend something called as a pre-mortem tool. So I'll take you through this pre-mortem tool quickly, because this is like we call it the pre-mortem analysis. It's exact opposite of post-mortem. So you all have heard post-mortem, what is it about. So if you have watched, say, air crash investigations, you would know that there is usually some accident, and then people go out finding, the investigators go out finding as to what happened. Why did it happen? What was the chain of sequence? And what went wrong? Then it is followed by recommendations as to what needs to be done to avoid it later. Sometimes it's too late. But if we apply pre-mortem analysis, which is pretty sophisticated in terms of identifying issues well in advance and fixing them as many as possible, it can enable you to implement technology in a considerate manner. Now let's understand how any AI, any machine learning system usually progresses, or how this development is done. And I'm not talking about a very generic level development, but a few key stages where this happens. So here we have got 6 steps. Right from we starting at a design stage, then going through the training stage. And for the training, we have got a data coming in, and that data, one step of data is coming from the training data set. Then we deploy this technology, right? So training our systems, we have data collection with training data coming in, then we deploy those systems, then we start using them, and then the feedback starts to come in, which then goes back into the training data. And then we keep refining this system. Now you can apply pre-mortem analysis in any of those 6 stages. I still remember a story from one of the Australian telcos that lost about $11 million by incorrectly designing and deploying technology. Only if they had used pre-mortem analysis, I'm certain they would have saved all that money. So in pre-mortem, you ask 3 critical questions for each of those stages, where, or any of the stage where you want to do pre-mortem, you could ask 3 critical questions. Right. At first, you would list down all those processes, all the steps that followed by the system, and then you ask questions, all the solutions. Then check function by function. And your first question you want to ask is, what are the problems that could occur as a result of this function or this step? And if they happen, how bad could that be? And that's the severity rating. If something goes wrong with this particular function in your system, would it be lethal, hazardous? If that is the case, that's the 10 rating. Or would it be mere annoyance? Then you get 1. So consider an AI machine, like a literal robot or machine, doing something wrong and causing a danger to a human life. That's 10 rating. Versus Netflix recommending you some bad movie that wastes your 1 hour. That's annoying. So that could be the lowest one. And depending upon where you stand, numbers could change. Similarly, you also go and ask questions regarding occurrences, such as how often this failure might occur. Will it occur every time? Then rating is 10. And if it occurs sparingly, 1 in million chance and something like that, then the rating is 1. However, when it comes to detection, and you can see the scale is reversed, it is reversed because higher detection means you can detect the problem early. So you are in better position to fix it early. So if something goes wrong, can you detect it? That's the question. And can you detect it easily? If the answer is yes, if you can detect it easily, you get to 1. But if you cannot detect it easily, if it has to go through the whole cycle and the user has to report back and the problem has happened, the damage is already done, then the detection rating is low. That means you get 10. Now, all three ratings can then be multiplied together. So you multiply severity, you multiply occurrence, you multiply detection, and they give you a risk priority number for each step. So that particular step where you ask these three questions, you get a risk priority number for that. And so you will get RPN, risk priority number, for all the steps that your software, that your technology or solution performs, and what is the risk priority number for each of that stage. And now you know which steps, which functions, which features your system has that are more critical than others. When you know it, you can focus on them, apply some control measures to fix issues beforehand. You don't have to wait for something to go wrong because now you have found it out early on. Doing this analysis will enable you to gain a very high level of confidence in your solution. And it's not only about doing things right, it's not only about doing the right thing as well. It is also about covering all the risks. And that is where you can raise your technology ethics quotient. Now you can look at the link below where I have included some reading material as a follow-up. If you want to get into pre-mortem analysis further and understand how it works, there are a few templates. So go ahead, check out whenever you get time. That could be useful for you. Now there might be a question that most of you might want to ask. All right. And the question is being cautious, right? If you have to be so cautious and measured, won't it slow down my development? Won't it stifle the innovation? But remember, I told you a story before. Brakes in the car do not slow it down. They enable it to go faster. So doing all this analysis is not going to slow it down. It feels like that, but it won't. It will enable you, it will help you to go faster. It will enable you to move faster and innovate better without having unintended consequences of your solution. You see, when I work with a lot of startups and entrepreneurs, I get a feel and a vibe that says it. I see a lot of people wanting to work with companies that have got some social connections, got higher ethical quotient, some purpose, as they call it. That's where I believe every organization with a high ethical capacity will have a competitive advantage in coming future, and you could be seeing it even now. And you could develop this competitive advantage. You could develop and improve this ethical quotient if you develop technology the right way. And that is why I keep saying that it is on you to build that technology right. Because when you look back 3 to 5 years from now, you have to look at what you have done, what you have developed, what you have created. You should be proud of it, right? Because remember, technology always brings us two things. It brings us a promise of prosperity, promise of good lifestyle, and so on. But it also brings us consequences, mostly unintended consequences. And it is the consequences that we must be worried about, we must be careful about, because ultimately, you are the individual contributor to the tech economy. That is why you have to be considerate. So be considerate, because ultimately you have the power. Thank you so much for listening. Let's have a questions. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Senzale.
Thank you so much, Anand. Um, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the questions panel on your right. We'll be able to attend to the questions. Fortunately, the next session is about ethics, which is quite in line with what Anand was talking about there. Anand, I will definitely be interested in learning more about the pre-mortem model or framework. Thank you for that presentation there. Really appreciate.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break, and up next is a panel discussion that talks about data privacy, security, and ethical consideration. So please do not go away. It's going to be a very exciting conversation. We'll see you in a bit. Thank you.